Hey YouTube, welcome back to another video. In this tutorial, I'm going to be teaching you all about directives. So what is a directive? Well, a directive is a class that can add new behavior to the elements in the template or modify existing behavior. Now that might sound a little confusing at first, but trust me, it's all going to make sense really soon. So something important to note is that there's three types of directives. One is structural directives, the other is attribute directives, and the third is components. A component is actually considered a directive in Angular. So if you know what components are, you basically already know one of the three types of directives. Now first I'm going to start off with structural directives, and then I'm going to teach you about attribute directives. So right here I have a array of strings called people. And in that array of strings we have John, Abraham, Cole, and Wesley. Now let's say I wanted to print. So I could go in and I could define an unordered list, and I could use string interpolation to display each of the names. So I have people 0, people 1, people 2, and people 3. And if I save this is going to work. You see I have an unordered list. Let me make that bigger, which has John, Abraham, Cole, and Wesley. But when we're programming, a common programming rule is that we want dry code. Now what does dry code mean? Well, dry stands for don't repeat yourself. And right now we're not repeating ourselves too much, but if the people array had maybe 30 names instead of 4, you can see how this would become tedious. And that's where structural directives come in. So what structural directives are going to do is allow us to use conditional code inside of our template. And what do I mean by conditional code? I mean things like if statements, for loops, and switch cases. We're going to be able to use all of that inside of Angular. So I'm going to delete the last 3 LIs here and just leave the first one. And I'm going to use a structural directive called ngFor. And now to use this, you simply put a star and you write ngFor and you set that equal to people of people. Actually, I can set this equal to person of people, and inside here I can simply put person. Oops, I have to put let. So let person of people, and then I can save, and you'll see we got the exact same thing. John, Abraham, Cole, and Wesley. Now let me explain what's going on here. This is for of syntax. Basically what's going on here is that people is the array that we defined right here, and person is a single element of people, and person can be named anything. I could have X of people and it'll still do the same thing. Now let's move on to another structural directive, which is ngIf. Now just like ngFor, which works exactly like a for of loop, ngIf works exactly like an if statement. And one thing I forgot to mention is that we need to include this star right here in front of ngFor. And what the star does is basically let us know that this is a structural directive. So we're going to see that in ngIf as well. But anyways, moving on to ngIf, something important to know is that we can't have two structural directives in the same tag. So if I were to add an ngIf in here, that will give me an error right away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this all up in a div. And now I'll use ngIf, and here I can just put true, because this is going to be an expression. So I'm just going to show you how it works. So right now we can see everything, and now if I set this to false, we won't be able to see it. It disappears. And if we look inside the DOM, something important to note is that it actually completely removes the element from the DOM. Same with ngFor. This is why we call them structural directives. We call them that because it actually changes the structure of the DOM. But let's make this a little more interesting. So I'm going to add a variable called isVisible, and I want to set that equal to false. And then I'm going to set this ngIf to isVisible. Now right now we won't see anything. I forgot to save. So right now we won't see anything because isVisible is false. Let's say I were to add a button, and every time we click that button, we could call a function called toggle visibility. Now I haven't defined that function yet. So let me go ahead and do that. I could say toggle visibility, and then I could say isVisible is equal to not isVisible. Now I'll have a button which can show and hide this list that I created. And that's ngIf. Now the last built-in structural directive we're going to talk about is ngSwitch. Alright, so I'm going to comment out this code that we have right here. And I'm going to add in a bunch of images. And the first image is going to be of a dog. And I'll copy the image address. Then I'll find the cat. And I'll copy the image address again. And then I'll find a hamster. I'll put that image address. Now if we look at our code, these images are way too big. So I'm going to update the CSS to make the width of these images 100 pixels. Alright, so now we have our images. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how ngSwitch works. So I'm going to define a variable called pet. And I'm going to set pet equal to hamster. Now from here I can simply create a div. Put these images in here. And this is going to work exactly like a switch statement. So I can write with property binding ngSwitch, and then I can set that to our variable called pet. Now I'm going to add an ngSwitch case. And here we use the star because this is a structural directive. So we write ngSwitch case, and then inside the parentheses, we needed another set of parentheses to specify that we're looking for a string named dog. Note, if that I were to take away the inside parentheses, we would get an error because there's no property called dog. See, right now it's looking for a variable called dog. Once I add these inner parentheses, it's looking for a string. So I have a switch case for dog. Now I'll add one for cat. And I'll add one for hamster. And since our pet is set to hamster, when I go back to the page, we're going to see just a hamster. Now let's switch this to a dog. I'll write dog. A dog shows up, and cat, we'll get a cat showing up. And that's basically ngSwitch. Now it's time to talk about the attribute directives. And we have two main attribute directives, which are ngClass and ngStyle. And those do exactly what the name suggests. They allow us to dynamically add classes or styles, respectively, in our application. So I'm going to add some classes to our application. The first one's going to be color class, which is just going to set the color to red. And the second one's going to be background color class, which is going to set the background color to blue. Now let's go back to, now let's delete this code right here, and we can uncomment this code. Now I'm simply going to add those classes using ngClass, and this is wrapped up in square brackets using property binding. And then in here I'm going to add in another set of quotation marks. This time it's just going to be single quotes. And I'm going to write our class names. So the first one was color class, and the second one was background color class. Now if I hit save, we'll see that we have these classes applied to our application. But you might be wondering, what's the point of this? Because I can just simply replace this with class and it's going to do the exact same thing. Well, the difference between the two is that ngClass allows us to use expressions to set each class. Now, something I didn't teach you yet is that we can actually use an index of I inside of this ngFor. So if I put a semicolon here and I write index as I, inside each tag I can actually use I. So let's say I put I here and I save. You'll see that now we have a number. Let me make that look better. You'll see that now we have a number beside each of these elements. So I'm going to set an expression and I'm going to say if I is greater than 2, we're going to set the color class. Otherwise, we're going to set the background color class. And this should be a question mark. So basically what I'm doing here, this is what's called using ternary operators. This is a short form for an if-else statement. Basically, if I is greater than 2, we're going to set the class property as color class. And if it's not, we're going to set it as background color class. Now if I look at our code, we're going to see that the first 3 are not greater than 2, so they get the background color class, but the third one just gets the simple color class. Now I'm going to show you how ngStyle works. ngStyle and ngClass fundamentally do the same thing. ngClass is specifically for classes, while ngStyle is for HTML styles, which we add to an attribute. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change ngClass with ngStyle. And we're going to keep the same condition if I is greater than 2. And if it is, we're going to delete this and we're going to open up parentheses. And I'm going to say color to be red. Otherwise, I'm going to set the color to be green. And if I save that and I toggle the visibility, you're going to see we did the exact same thing just using ngStyle. The only difference was instead of changing the background color, I simply just changed the color. Anyways, everyone, that's going to wrap up today's video. I hope you learned something. Obviously, this is just the start of how directives can work. There's a lot more to it. Also, you can create your own directives, which I'm going to teach later. But for now, I think that's enough content for one video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, although you don't have to. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.